So before we talk about your book, you've been in Hollywood, haven't you?
Yeah, I was there actually a couple of weeks ago. I was, the tour started on basically on May 10th, and one of my first stops was the Redondo Beach store of Mysterious Galaxy, where I was for the official debut of Human Division on the 14th. But I was there a couple days early, and Old Man's War is already in process in Hollywood, and it's going off to, Wolfgang Peterson is directing, and it's being produced by Scott Stuber. So it's, it's moving along. And I have a Hollywood agent who's always like, you need to come out, they need to see you, like maybe do some lunch and all that sort of stuff. And he really talks like that,
really,
which is awesome. He's a very old world agent, And so I was out there in January recording an episode of Tabletop with Will Wheaton, which apparently is going to go out next Tuesday, that particular episode.
Okay.
And when I was there, I popped in to see my agent, and I gave him these things that are called one-sheets, which are just 5 one-page ideas that we could pitch as movies. And so he picked 3 of those, and I built those out. And then he set up interviews with me for various Hollywood producer types. And when I went to go pitch, I used none of my one-sheets. It was really sort of amusing to me, because they're like, well, one we talked about red shirts. Another one I talked about an idea which I created for one sheet but didn't actually build out. And then the other one, they actually said, no, we want to ask you about something, because they had a particular project they were doing with a particular person, and they were like, could you help us with that? And I was like, of course. And I was like, why yes, my job is to make your job easier. Which, but it's a very surreal experience, and one that I recommend for everybody. Everybody should go pitch Hollywood at least once. Because, because it really is one of those things where, if you've ever seen the movie The Player, where they have, kind of the opening sequence of it is that they're going through this studio, and you can see all these people pitching it. It's sort of like Pretty Woman, meets My Beautiful Laundrette, plus the Avengers, or or something like that. They just jam them all together, and they like that Star Trek episode where everybody talks in metaphor, right? And it's exactly like that. Everybody talks in previous movies. It's like this, and you add this together, and you squish them together, and then it'd be perfect for Tom Cruise, or it'd be perfect for whomever.
Right.
And it's fun, right? It's just you got to go in knowing, right? You got to go in knowing that anything that you're doing is going to be just no chance of it ever happening unless it does.
Right.
But if you just assume that you're going in and you're making connections and you're having a good time, and if something works, it's great. And if not, then you've still sort of had that experience. Then it's a ton of fun.
So the appeal is almost just like saying whatever comes into your head, and no.
You have to. It is almost improvisatory, where you have to be. They're like, we need this. And it's like, well, as a matter of fact, I just happen to have written something like this.
Really?
And then off you go. But I kind of, that's not completely unknown to me. When I sold Old Man's War, right? Tor asked me if I had a second book, right? And because their thinking was, we're getting you cheap for this first one, let's get you cheap for 2.
Right.
Perfectly understandable, and I was on board with that. But I didn't have a second book that they were interested, that I had. So when they said, "Do you have a second book?" I was like, "Absolutely." And then I pitched them a book, and this was the pitch: man solves diplomatic crisis through the use of action scenes and snappy dialogue, and that became the Android stream. So so the whole idea of when they say, "Do you have something?" If you're quick on your feet, the answer is sure, why not? And here we go. So the worst that they can say is no. And if you go into saying that they're going to say no anyway, that doesn't hurt to try.
Might as well have some fun with it.
Might as well have some fun with it.
So can you tell us anything about what's happening with the Old Man's War movie?
The Old Man's War movie is in process. They had one screenwriter. They went with a different screenwriter for the script revisions. They sent it into Paramount, which is the studio that it's at, with the completed script, I think, at the end of the year last year.
Okay.
Paramount said, of course, this is great, and then said, but we have notes, which is, anybody who's a writer knows that drill, right? And so they gave them notes, and they decided to go with a different screenwriter to punch up a few things. The current screenwriter is a guy named Chris Bull, who one of the hot new writers in Hollywood. He sold like 3 scripts in rapid succession to a bunch of studios, including one about Vikings. So, you know, and his brother is Mark Bowl, who wrote Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. So, you know, so I'm optimistic, and they're optimistic. They still are happy to continue the process.
Right. So World War Z is coming out soon.
Right.
And Max Brooks, his latest statement on this is that it shares the title and nothing else.
Sure.
So how intimate do you plan to be with this movie? Like when if you know let's say it probably won't do bad, but if it does, are you planning to stand up and defend it, or are you planning to run and hide?
Here's what I've said to people when we announced the movie deal publicly. I said I want to be sure that everybody is clear about this, that the movie is not the book is not the movie. They are taking the book, they're going to be adapting it, and they're going to be changing it, and they're going to use it as the basis, but what eventually is going to come out is going to be something that's going to be different. It just simply has to be. Actually, Michael Crichton, I interviewed him for Jurassic Park, because back in the day I was a movie critic.
Right.
And he said something which I thought was very, very wise, and which I kept in my brain about for all this stuff as well, which is that, you know, Jurassic Park was a 400-page book. A script, if you were to put it in the same sort of formatting as a novel, would be 40 pages. So immediately you lose 90%. Now a lot of that you're going to gain because it's visual, you don't have to show description, but you're still losing a significant amount of the book, and you have to pick and choose which things you're going to use, and some things about the book aren't going to work on screen even though they work on the page. And so you have to figure out how to make that work. If you know that's the case, then going in, you know, everything, you know, you begin to understand why they change things around. The other thing is that when I have a producer that they've assigned to me, you know, who is very good with dealing with anxious writers, going, oh my God, you know, why are you destroying my text? All that sort of stuff. And so she and I were talking about this, and for example, they were talking about a change that they were going to make, or that they were thinking of making, and she was like, but I want you to know, we're still very much interested in your vision. I was like, well, let's have this conversation now so we don't have to have it again, which is, I want you to make a film that when people who've read the book go to see the movie, that they can say, yes, this is very much the story that I fell in love with. I can see how they made changes and why they made the changes, and even though they had to do that, it's still very much in line with the thing that I loved about Old Man's War, the book. And I said, so that is what I would like. But if you can't do that, make a movie that makes a boatload of money. And the reason for that is because then people will go back and they'll read the book will go back into the bestseller list, people will actually read the story I wrote, the sequel will happen, my sequel deals at 110%, right? And then my daughter will go to college, right? So as far as it goes, you know, I'm really not of the opinion that the book is not going to change. The book is the book. I own the book. I'm not changing the book at all. The movie is going to be another thing entirely, and to some extent, whether it is like the book or whether it is in name only, it's going to sell my book, and so ultimately, I will benefit one way or the other. And I've never, even if I absolutely hated the movie, which I don't think I will from what they've, you know, what we've talked about so far. You know, the fact is I'm going to keep my mouth shut until, you know, 20 years later. It's like 20 years on, whenever they make it. If they make it in 2016, 2036, ask me what I think of the movie, and I'll let you know. You know, from my pile of money that they gave me from the movie.
Do you hope to have an actual money bin at that point that you could swim in?
It's the actual hot tub of money. Right? You have the four hot tubs. One is filled with money.
Right.
One is filled with chocolate.
Okay.
The other one, you know, another one is, you know, filled with whipped cream, and the fourth one, I don't know, sriracha sauce.
Sriracha sauce.
You want to, everyone will say, no, you don't want the sriracha sauce hot tub. But yeah, no, it's, you know, it's nice when they, you know, they say, we want to make a movie. Here's some money. Let us make it. And you go, try to make that movie, and then
do your best.
Do your best. In the meantime, I will just take your money. Because like I said, I have a daughter. She
course.
wants to go to college. You know, I have a mortgage. It wants to be paid. So,
Right.
you know, it's free money. Why not take it?
That's good advice.
I suppose so.
That would be the best
Not,
advice
you
I
know,
ever
and people
got.
are like, he's not real whole about the purity of his words, is he? You know.
Well, there's some refreshing about the honesty, I think.
Well, you know, it's like, why lie? You know, it's like,
Right.
yes, you know, go ahead, give me tons of money.
No, I don't like that.
And yeah, no. I wish to remain poor but honest. No, I can be rich and honest. I'm completely honest about how I feel about these things. But again, and again, like I said, they don't change the books. The books are the books.
Of course. Speaking of books, we might as well talk about this one.
Okay.
So let's talk about The Human Division. This is your latest.
Yes.
And it began as a serialized novel, didn't it?
Right. Well, what happened was a couple years ago, right around the time that Fuzzy Nation was about to come out, my editor Patrick contacted me and said that Tor was interested in doing something with serialization.
Right.
You know, and they were thinking maybe taking Fuzzy Nation and doling it out chapter by chapter online. And they asked me what I thought about that. And I was like, I would prefer not. And part of that was because it wasn't designed to be read chapter by chapter in isolation.
Right.
You know, it's meant to be read like a novel all the way through. I was like, if we're going to do something like this, why don't we actually do this and take something and build it up from, you know, the ground up. And so they were amenable because they were, like I said, they were already inclined to try to do something new with the digital medium because, you know, we're at an inflection point in publishing where digital is really important, but, you know, but print is still really important as well and will
Right.
probably continue to be important. So you have, how do you balance the two? So we went and we had this conversation. I came into Tor offices in New York and we talked for a couple hours about this. And what we came down to was, let's build something that is digital native, that we can do things with it that we couldn't do in print, or would be very difficult in print. One of the things that's very difficult in print is to do serialization sort of in an episodic fashion like we're doing, where you take a story, make it complete in and of itself, so someone who read it wouldn't have to read anything else in context to get it. But if you do a whole bunch of those episodes one after the other, you will see a larger narrative arc. And that's something you can do really well and to some extent easily in digital, would be very hard to do in print. You can serialize in the magazines that
Right.
are in the science fiction arena, but those magazines have a fairly limited circulation at this point.
Right.
You wouldn't get a lot, you wouldn't address a larger audience. You could try to distribute them to bookstores, but then you have to sell the idea to the bookstores. It's kind of an unconventional idea, and they would probably say, we'd really just rather have, you know, the novel,
Right.
But with digital, it was easier to do. So we built it like that, and basically we built it to see what would happen. We all knew going in, when we were doing this episodic thing, that it could fail and fail in a really big way. But on the other hand, I mean, we're at a period in time in publishing where, you know, the old model doesn't work the way it used to work anymore. There's probably another model that's emerging, but we're not there yet. And it's the time where you can say, let's try stuff. Let's throw it up against the wall, see if it sticks. If it sticks, then we can use it not just for the next John Scalzi book, but for other books in Tor and other books in Macmillan. You know, we have a data point there. And so, you know, everybody, like I said, everybody knew it could fail miserably. But if it failed miserably, even that would be a success because they would have the information. We would know. We would know. And so it's done very well.
Wow.
So as far as that goes, each of the individual episodes showed up on the USA Today bestseller list. So, you know, that was kind of cool. So
hard to argue with that.
So yeah, for 13 weeks, every week, you know, there was a John Scalzi title in that bestseller list, and it was a different title. So I think we're pretty sure that nobody else has had 13 separate titles debut on the USA Today bestseller list in 13 separate consecutive weeks. So it's one of those really obscure records, like the best, you know, left-handed pitcher who, you know, most walks by, you know, and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But it's still a record, and I will totally take it. Totally. But it's done very well. And then the other half of the experiment is what we're dealing with now, which is now it's come out in print. Now we're going to see whether or not whether the print audience and the electronic audience are the same and one cannibalizes the other, or if they are actually kind of separate audiences with a very small shared group inside of them. And so far it seems that electronic readers and print readers are largely separate. And
really?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, there are people who have read it electronically who then buy the book.
Right.
But there are people. Every stop that I've gone on the tour so far, I've asked people to raise their hands. Like, how many of you read it electronically? And there were a couple of people who raised their hands. Like, how many of you waited for the print release so that you could have it all at one time? And then a whole bunch of other hands went up. And so what we're seeing is, now, it's a self-selected group of people who are going to show up at a bookstore anyway to come see me, but we do see that there is a very dedicated print audience as well as a very dedicated electronic audience. And this is something that's actually very important for people to realize, because at this point, people really are, it's like, Team Electric, or, Team ebook, and then there are people like, no, Team Print, and it's like, the Jets and the Sharks, and there's going to be a battle.
With hand jiving.
Right,
and so forth.
and everybody's going to get winded really quickly, but,
We are.
Right, exactly.
Alright, so we'll continue this on Counter-Strike.
Right, exactly. So, but what we see is that these are audiences that are largely separate, and they're audiences that still need to be addressed. And so, if you're only doing print, or if you're only doing ebook, you are missing a significant portion of your potential audience, and that's something that I think authors need to be aware of, because we are where people are like, oh, we don't need print anymore. It's like, no, you really do still need print, because there are people who really still like print. There are people who are like, oh, I don't want to deal with the electronic people. It's like, no, you really need to deal with them too, because the electronic people are like, I just read your book, it was awesome, I downloaded every other book you've bought,
Right.
Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? So for a complete balanced career, you need to do every single format that people love.
Okay, well, why don't we take a quick poll here. How many of you in the audience read the Human Division electronically before buying the print book? So, yeah, there we go. A lot of people.
And how many of you waited for the hardcover edition? Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it is right there in our very small audience, about half electronic, half print.
Yep.
So,
Are you guys going to rumble now? Because that would be cool.
we got them all mixed up. We're getting
Right,
separated.
exactly.
You went both, John.
Here we go. That's great. The books make a great legend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it occurs to me, like, the print gang actually has an advantage here.
Well, no, it's like that is heavier, but on the other hand, the electronic ones, they can crease your skull.
Oh,
Kind of like a blade. So it's like reach versus hitting power sort of
this
thing.
senseless war.
Yeah. Right.
Well, purely for my own curiosity, because there's the people who are constantly spouting that print is dead.
Sure.
Are our brothers and sisters who are self-published.
Sure.
And ebooks have done great for a lot of talents rising up
Sure.
to let their voices get out. How do you see? Because with your serialization, it still has your name, and you have a significant body of work.
Sure.
To push it. How would you see serialization working for, say, a newer talent?
Well, I mean, let's take the example of Hugh Howey, who did.
We're going to talk about you.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did do Wool, and it's a series of novellas, and people sort of picked up on that and did that, and we're very excited about that.
Right.
And so, from that point of view, there are always going to be a couple of people for whom the electronic medium is going to be their home.
Right.
Right. And one of the things we need to be careful about is we need to be careful about arguing from outliers.
Right.
To some extent, I'm an outlier among print folks because I am a New York Times bestseller. I do sell a lot of books. I do have a lot of books that are out there in my backlist.
You are also the core of American science fiction tradition at the moment,
Yeah.
according to the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction.
Right. So there's that.
Which is,
that's not a bad thing.
He's the core.
Well, to be fair, I did call up Tor. It's like, did you see this quote? We're putting that on the cover of the Human Division. They're like, oh, that seems to make sense. But the other thing is that and then for the folks like E.L. James or Amanda Hocking or Hugh Howey, they sell extremely well in electronic. But the thing is the vast majority of print writers sell around 1,000 books, more or less. The vast majority of people who sell electronically sell around 500 books, more or less. When you add up what their royalty rates are for each of them, they're all making about the same amount of money.
Right.
So to some extent, the argument, from a purely financial point of view, the argument of which is better and which is worse for the average writer is flip a coin.
Right.
What it comes down to a lot is what do you see yourself doing? Are you a writer who is a person who spends all their time writing the books and occasionally coming out and talking about the books, or do you see yourself as the whole package, where you write it, you take care of the editing or hire someone to the editing, you take care of the cover art, that you are really engaged in the entire process. There are people who love all of that stuff and who don't want to give up any sort of control. And for those folks, the self-publishing or doing the thing where they are in charge of the whole process makes perfect sense for them, and I would say go and do that. Now for example, I like writing, and I'm reasonably good at marketing. I know I can't copy edit because, man, I just am an idiot. When I worked at a newspaper, I was a newspaper journalist. At one point, a copy editor actually came over to me and started strangling me because there were so many errors in my copy. And I learned, but I still drop a whole bunch of stuff. My cover art, I have a huge respect for, over at Tor, Irene Gallo, who is the art director, and all the various people that she hires to do that stuff, because they are smart and they know their business. The marketing people, know how to get stuff into the stores and how to promote it. And so there's a whole range of things that other people are more competent at that I don't want to do.
Right.
And for me, working with a traditional publisher, both for my print and my ebooks, it seems to make a lot of sense. I'll have occasional projects where I'll do it just on my own because I don't want to have to think about it, or because I want total control over those individual projects.
Right.
But by and large, I'm really happy to work with Tor, and people are like, but you could make more money doing it the other way. It's like, not necessarily, because the power that Tor has as a major publisher makes a difference in how I get to do things.
Plus, we know you prefer free money.
I prefer free money.
And that would do work. So.
That's exactly right. It's like, now that someone said, we'll take care of your copy editing, we'll take care of your cover art, we'll put it in stores, you don't have to worry about any of that sort of stuff. All you have to do is deliver 100,000 words. Easy.
Right. Fantastic. Well, tell us a bit about the Human Division then.
Okay. Well, it's the fifth book in the Old Man's War series. Events take place after the Last Colony and Zoe's Tale, which were books that ran concurrently. And the basic upshot of it is that the Earth and the Colonial Union, which is the polity of human worlds except for the Earth, they're not getting along anymore. And it's because the Earth has discovered that basically the Colonial Union was farming them for colonists and also for soldiers, and they were like, that's not right.
Right.
And so two things are happening. The Colonial Union and the Earth are trying to work out their differences,
right.
Going to a couples counselor or something like that, as you will. And then also the Colonial Union has realized that their traditional way of dealing with aliens, which is shoot as many of them as possible until we get our way, is not going to work as well anymore, partly because they don't have a whole lot of new soldiers coming in. So now they're trying this crazy new idea called diplomacy. And so the majority of the novel follows what is at the beginning of the book called the B team, sort of a lower status, lower ranked diplomatic team that kind of handles all the scut work, and they get unexpectedly thrust into a very critical situation. And then once that happens, then we see them continue on as they go through the book, handling other situations as well. And there continue to be situations that if they succeed, that's great for them. If they don't, then we can blame it on them, so it all works out well for everybody involved. And so that is the main thrust of the novel. But at the same time, one of the things that we get to do, because it's episodic, is we get to take like side trips. We visit Earth, and we visit some of the people there. We find out some of the concerns that they have. We go and we visit the Conclave, which is the alien, the alien confederation, and we find out what their interests are. We can see some of the characters who, in a traditional novel, we wouldn't get to spend any time with, and we get to literally follow them home and see how they've become who they become. And for me, that was very exciting because the universe in Old Man's War is getting increasingly complicated.
Right.
And in one sense, I think that's cool. In another sense, it's difficult to sort of cover that complexity in the traditional narrative.
Right.
So when we had the opportunity to, build an episodic sort of thing, I was like, great, because now I can show you more about what's going on in this world. So that was very exciting to me that we got to do that for this particular novel.
Outstanding. Let's talk a bit about your online presence.
Okay.
Or should I say, like, your online omnipresence? Because you, for lack of a better, you are everywhere. I've been attending Phoenix Comic-Con with John, and it's a very surreal experience because he knows absolutely everybody somehow. I'll stand with him and fans will come up, that's no big surprise. Other authors will come up, no big surprise. Webcomics people come up, no big surprise. Last night, he walks into a bar with Jewel State, actors, actresses. Everyone knows John Scalzi, because John Scalzi is everywhere.
Okay.
And you cannot escape him.
Well, I don't know how I feel about this characterization, but continue.
Well, all right. But you dedicate a very large amount of your time to your online presence.
Sure.
And you use it. Your presence has grown so vast that you actually help other authors out with the big idea and so forth. And you also use it to talk about a large range of social issues.
Sure.
So, and I've been there when you've gotten some flack for the social issues.
Sure.
But I guess, extremely crude way to ask, but, any regrets going the way you have with your social media presence?
No. Part of that is that, by and large, I'm aware. There's two things there. I mean, one, yes, I have a large footprint.
Right.
But at the same time, being really big online, there was a great Onion article, which was, man with 2.5 million followers is excited to make $21,000 a year, or something like that. The idea being that the correlation between significance in the online world and the significance in the world outside of the online world, the correlation is not necessarily strong. And so you have to have a healthy respect for what does being big big on the internet really get you. But the other thing is that I think with relation to the things that I talk online, I've always been very opinionated.
Right.
And I had one of the reasons that I started Whatever, which is my blog, was I used to be a newspaper columnist. I had a newspaper. I was a nationally syndicated columnist when I was in my 20s, which was not necessarily a bright idea for them to have done. But they did it anyway, and so I was used to being able to speak my mind. That was my job.
Right.
And so I continued to do that online, and I think that one of the things that people are scared about, quite honestly, is that when you are a public figure to a greater or lesser extent, or when you become a writer, that you should basically not speak your mind, because there will always be people who will be unhappy with the way you speak your mind, and they will no longer buy your stuff. But the simple fact of the matter is there will always be people who are upset with you with one way or another. And so I don't even have to talk about politics or social issues. There was one time where I made a crack about, Macintoshes, the computer, not the Apple.
Easy there. I have a Mac.
Right, yeah, exactly. But and this guy got so incensed, he was like, "I will never read you again." Or there are other people where, you'll talk about your kid and they will, it's like, you shouldn't talk about your children online. The predators are waiting to leap out. And there will always be people who, regardless of what you say,
right.
Will argue with you. It's like, I like dark chocolate. Other people would be like, milk chocolate or die. And they will really, it doesn't matter. Anything that you could possibly say, the internet is vast and someone will take offense of it. For me, the point of, and also, quite frankly, I think that the impulse of other people to try to shut you up, because of money. It's like, I will not buy your thing because I disagree with your politics. That's fine,
right.
But I find it kind of offensive. I'm of the old school First Amendment of, I may not agree with everything you have to say, but I will, fight to the death for your, to defend your right to say it. It's okay, or the other way that I would put it is, I fully endorse your ability to make an ass of yourself online.
Right.
If that's what you really want and that gives you joy, then go ahead and do it, and off we go. But the point of the matter is that there is nothing to be gained in our political culture by people shutting up for fear of losing money. If you have something to say and you have the ability to articulate it and argue it well, which is the catch,
right.
mind you, then you should be willing to make those stands if that's something you think is important. I would never criticize people for not talking about things online or anywhere else. But if you feel that this is something I have to say, then you should go ahead and say it. I mean, every time someone has said, I will never read your stuff again, I gain 2 more readers who are interested either because of the stuff that I've written or because they don't care. And to be fair, there's lots of people who are like, politically I think you're a moron,
right.
but I do like your fiction, so I will keep reading your fiction and occasionally popping in on your site to tell you you're a moron. And I'm like, fair enough. That's the way it works. But there's nothing to be gained in our society by shutting up. There's everything to be gained, again, if you can make a reasoned argument by making that reasoned argument. So.
Well, this will be a nice segue into my next question, which is directly related to the people who show up to call you a moron.
Sure.
But tell us about your shirt.
Oh, the Gamma Rabbit.
Rabbit.
Gamma Rabbit shirt. There's some people online who like to call me names and say I'm a terrible person and all these obnoxious things. And I don't tend to think very highly of them because I tend to think that they're racist and sexist and homophobic, and I'm I try to be none of those things.
Of course.
And one of these folks earlier on in the year began to make it his business to talk about me every day, and send his followers would come over and they would make a mess on my site and I would have to delete their comments and so on and so forth. And most of the time I'm like, whatever, because you can't stop people from saying stupid things about you online, and sometimes it's even amusing. And you're like, hey, look at what this guy says about me. This is funny. But eventually it got to the point where I was like, okay, this is getting a little obnoxious. And so I made a pledge. I was like, this guy clearly wants to talk about me all the time because he seems to think that this is something that will be of benefit to him. I'm like, all right, well, if he thinks that's going to be a benefit to him, let me make it a benefit to others. So every time this fellow says my name or uses an obnoxious nickname for me on his site, I will put $5 into a pot. And then after that, after a year, from January until December, I'll add up the number of times he talks about me, compute that as to what the size of the pot is, and then split that pot 4 ways. One to NAACP, to the Human Rights Campaign, to Emily's List, and to the Rape, Incest, Abuse National Network.
Right.
And so that these populations of people whom this fellow and all his little followers despise will see the benefit of him saying bad things about me online. And other people will go, hey, that's a great idea, can we join in? And I was like, absolutely, the more the merrier. So after a week, we $70,000 in pledges for these 4 organizations, and then for other charities and organizations that help groups and segments of our society that this fellow and his followers despise. And as a celebration of that, one of the things that these guys like to say is that I'm not an alpha male, not even a beta male. I'm a gamma male, which basically means it's like, oh hi matriarchy, here's your fresca, and I'm not a wolf. I'm a rabbit to be hunted by the wolves and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so when we passed $50,000, I commissioned the Gamma Rabbit, who is everybody's friend, who likes you for who you are, does not seek to change you or mock you, and just wants to give you a hug as long as that's something you're okay with, right? And we actually made T-shirts with this. We donated that also to the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. The proceeds from that, and so I actually have seen like 4 or 5 of them at the convention so far. It was very exciting, but it's an example again about you can't stop people from saying what they're going to say. You can't even stop them from saying what they're going to say about you. What you can do is take other people's attempt to humiliate you, to try to demean you, to try to suggest you are less than human or less than them, and turn it into a positive, not only for yourself, but for the other people that they seem to hate and despise and feel are less worthy of being human than they are. So every time this dude says my name now, I'm just like, bring it, it's all good.
Yeah, I was following this, and one of the names they were fond of calling you was a mangina, which I learned was actually not a tasty tropical fruit beverage.
No, it's not. Well, there are lots of things that they like.
Of course, a lot of them we won't utter here.
Yeah, exactly, because there are children in prison. But there are a lot of things that they called me, and it's just sort of like, really, this is the best you can do. I mean, one of the things that I used to do way back when, before I had the comment section, is that people would send me hate mail because they had no other way to reach me, so they would off they would come.
That out,
yeah, they would actually that would be what they would say. But they would just say, you're horrible and I hate you and I wish you would die in a fire and all that sort of stuff. And I would go back and I would grade the hate mail. I'd be like, I get die in a fire a lot. Could you like spice that up? Could you actually make that a little more interesting? Not just die in the fire, but what kind of fire? Is it like a barbecue? Are we, is it a house fire? I need specificity. Please go back and do it again. And I would give it a grade. I'm like, this is D-. I know you have it in you to do better. Please do. And so send it back. And this would enrage them even further because, of course, the reaction is you're supposed to have is like, oh no, they said horrible things about me. I'm like, no. This is not good. I mean, if you're going to actually, if you're actually going to say horrible things about it, at least make it interesting.
Right.
And so they would, then it would be all caps. I'm like, all caps is so blasé.
Right.
I mean, that's like
you're just trying too hard.
It's so 2003. Come on, keep doing it. And eventually they would just go crazy and either leave me alone. It's like I can't. You don't appreciate my efforts, and off they go. There's a new version of that, which on the blog, which. Normally I delete the comments that are beyond the pale, or whatever, and I just put deleted because this person's a jerk, or deleted because this is boring, and all that sort of stuff, which annoys some of them. But but some people keep persisting, and eventually what I ended up doing is we developed kittening, which is that. One of these guys will come in and they'll like use that word that you just uttered, or all this sorts of stuff, or like say, oh, you're a gamma male, or about all that sort of stuff. And what I will do, because they're trying to assert their masculine superiority,
of course.
So I'll put I'll remove their comment and I'll put a comment that says, I like fluffy kittens so much I could just snuggle them forever. And they're like, oh, how could you do that? How could you do that? And it's like, and of course I would delete that one. I could just pet the kittens all day. They smell so fresh like the outdoors, and it just enrages them because they want to project this hyper masculine thing, and then you just talk about how fluffy kittens are and how you just love to see them scamper and all that sort of stuff. And I always make clear that this is what I've done, that this is an actual kittening. But it actually, I had one guy who was like so enraged, he's like, I'm never coming back. I'm like, yeah. This was in fact the plan. So well done you for getting it. But that's but it's the same. It's the same sort of thing. It's like really, if that's the word you're gonna get, it's like, boy, I haven't been called that before.
Right.
Could we spice that up? Could you bedazzle that?
All right. Well, I'm gonna open it up to questions real soon, but I mentioned this to you last night.
You warned me that this was coming.
A proud tradition in science fiction writers is that, it seems at a certain point in your career you can have a good old-fashioned public meltdown.
Sure.
Where you just go ranting against whoever and whatever, and I'm only thinking of your career, but I haven't seen you do that.
Strangely enough, I mean, it's something that I try to avoid.
And I figured you're in Hollywood, you're writing books, you're just too busy.
Right.
So I have gone ahead
and created a meltdown.
I've created a meltdown for you.
All right.
To have. It needs just a little input.
All right.
From you. So
I was about to. Is this like Meltdown Mad
This
Libs?
is Meltdown Mad Libs. the very first instance of Meltdown Mad Libs. So we're just gonna fill this out. So all I need from you is a verb.
A verb? Oh, inflaminate. As long as, because if we're gonna have a meltdown, we might as well just throw grammar out the window.
We need to bust out our most pretentious
right.
words possible.
Inflaminate.
In true science fiction tradition.
Right, exactly.
A type of fruit.
A type of fruit. A durian. Have you ever had a durian? Yeah, those are very, very fragrant.
All right, an adjective.
An adjective. Pusillanimous. I can't even say it right.
And another adjective?
Egregious. Is that a verb? Is that an adjective? That's an adjective, right?
That is.
It's like, no, it's a gerund, you idiot.
All right, I need a noun.
A noun. What kind of car do you drive?
I drive a Rubicon.
That's my Jeep Rubicon.
All right. I need a type of marsupial.
Type of marsupial.
Your favorite marsupial?
Oh, boy, this is a possum.
A possum.
It's a marsupial. That's the only North American marsupial.
Yeah, it's kind of dull.
You got to root for the home. team.
All right. A verb.
A verb. Let's see. Throat punch.
This is going to be a very good meltdown. All right, another verb.
Another verb. Tongue bathe.
This all actually works really well.
It's all of a piece.
Right. A farm animal.
A farm animal. I'm gonna go with a fainting goat. Because everybody knows what the fainting goats are, right?
We all live on the internet, so
yes.
we know. All right. Another adjective.
Let's see. Let's go for a simple one. Poke.
Adjective? Poke.
Poke is not an adjective. I'm sorry.
That's a verb.
Going with verb.
Yeah.
That's for the next verb. Thing.
Next verb.
You can go ahead and just put poke.
Okay.
Adjective. Rancid? Rancid.
Yes.
That's a good one because it just sounds bad.
Yeah, it's very good. All right. What is your favorite insect?
What is my favorite insect? I'm gonna go with the rhinoceros beetle. Because they're like this big, right?
They're huge.
They are huge.
And they have horns.
Right.
All right. Just three more. I need an adjective.
An adjective. What was the adjective I was just thinking of? Moist. It's a word everybody hates.
It's a terrible word. One more noun. Well,
two more nouns. A noun. Three-toed sloth.
That'll work. And one more noun.
One more noun. Harrier jet.
I think we are ready. So I'd like you to take a moment to just take a deep breath. Bring
Sure.
up your rantiest voice possible.
Oh God.
And I've written very clearly here, so go right ahead and look straight into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you John Scalzi's Public Meltdown.
My friends, there is an issue about which I can no longer remain silent. The issue which really inflaminates my durian. The profoundly pusillanimous among you will no doubt be egregious enough to require no further elucidation, but it is to those very clever Jeep Rubicons which I must speak. There's a problem in this country, and a ravenous opossum that is slowly throat-punching our very national identity. Our decisive tongue-bathing against these wild, fainting goats must be swift, and it must be rancid. To those patriots, those true rhinoceros beetles of virtue, I implore you, be strong, be swift, and remain moist. Our nation, our children, our very three-toed sloths are at stake. Godspeed and Harrier Jet. The worst part is that this is actually going out on the internet.
This is live. To everyone on Reddit, I told you you would not regret this. Well, that's my day complete. Why don't we open it up to questions from the audience?
Questions from the audience. Anyone have questions? It would be very awkward if none of you have questions.
Seriously, I'm out.
So there you go.
Yes.
This is clearly set up for more to come. Is there another book coming?
Uh,
And will it be a serial?
Okay, the question is, Human Division is set up for sequels, so is there in fact a sequel? And will it be in a episodic format? The first answer is yes, I signed a 2-book deal with Tor. One of those books is Human Division 2, The Quickening. It's a working title. It's a working title. We will figure it all out later. And then another is a standalone book. So there will be a second book in the series. What we are doing now is we're taking all of the data that we are collecting from the sales of the first book, the reaction people have to the first book, and seeing what we can learn from that. Like I said, this was intentionally an experiment, and you don't do experiments if you don't collect data. And so we're being very scientific about it, and then from there we will kind of decide whether we're going to do it in the episodic fashion like we did before, if there's another way to do it episodically that might make more sense, or should we just release an actual, compiled volume all at once. So all of that will be dealt with, in the coming months and stuff like that. I have already begun putting story elements together. And I will actually resolve the cliffhanger I left hanging, because otherwise people will come out of the woodwork to stab me. And I don't really want that to happen. I wish to remain unstabbed, if at all possible. So yes, in fact, some of the questions that were raised will be resolved in the next book.
So just for my own personal, will you be publishing the information you collect from this experiment?
I don't know what Macmillan plans to do with it. I mean, I've talked about it in the sense of,
This is very important.
because one of the things that I think is actually important is to share information. Like, for example, when Red Shirts finished its hardcover run and went into trade paperback, I took the sales figures from that and said, here's how many were hardcover, here's how many were ebook, and here's how many were audio, and use that to talk about where things are today. And I think the more information that people share, the better. That said, it's not all up to me personally.
Right.
I have found, typically speaking, that Tor has been very open with sharing information. They've never told me that I couldn't tell you how much I was making for a book,
Right.
or how many units I sold, or any of all that sort of stuff. But then again, it's not all just about Tor, it's also about Macmillan. So, and there may be some things that are like, well, we would prefer you don't talk about that, or what, and whatever. So I'm like I said, it was in many ways a very collaborative project. I don't want to rat out my collaborators. So we will figure it out from there.
Other questions?
Yes, sir.
Have you approached or has anyone approached you about expanding the Old Man's universe into different media other than movie, like video game, tabletop games?
Right. The question is, has anyone talked to me about expanding the Old Man's War universe into other things besides just movies and the books? Yes and no. I mean, one of the things is that when I sold the movie rights, I sold a lot of associated rights, because if the movie becomes successful, then they'll want the action figures and, you know, the video games and stuff like that. So all of those rights are tied into the movie rights. And so if the movie does well, then of course there will be Old Man's War, the video game, Old Man's War, the plush cuddly toys, you know, which would be awesome. I'd love to see a plush cuddly Kansu, you know, whatever those might eventually look like, and all that other sort of stuff. I do have, I have retained the graphic novel rights, because when we were initially doing the movie rights, I was in the middle of a negotiation for a graphic novel, for doing an Old Man's War graphic novel. That fell through for various reasons, which are not really that interesting at this point, but, so I still retain those, so there's a possibility we could do something with those. But most of those ancillary rights are tied into the movie deal.
Okay.
So.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
So first I want to say, loved Human Division. Stayed up all night reading it.
Sweet.
And so the last, I'm not going to say any spoilers, so be very careful.
Yeah.
The last episode, with the scene with the counselor meeting the people that she meets, it seemed like that was really, like, the last year has been kind of a rough year for the internet in terms of some of its maturity, and there's been some growing pains, and it seemed like some of that scene was written with the intention to remind people to be excellent. So you think, and I was wondering, was that intentionally sort of, or am I just sort of extrapolating?
Are you speaking about the episode called The Back Channel, or are you talking about the episode called Hefty Sorbo Eats a Churro and
Yes,
Speaks to the Youth of Today?
Sorbo with the churro.
Yeah. Which is, you know, I really appreciate that you weren't spoiling it, but when the title is Hefty Sorbo Eats a Churro and Speaks to the Youth of Today, it's okay to say she was speaking to a bunch of kids, right? Just so you know, it's right there in the title. I don't really spend too much time trying to transplant what's going on in my real world with what's going on in my fiction, because I find usually that's a good way to annoy people. One of the things that bothers me sometimes is I'll read science fiction where someone is making a pointed comment about politics today in a setting that's like 400 or 500 or 1,000 years in the future. And the way that I say that is like me trying to do that in the Old Man's War universe would be like us really being angry about the Alien and Sedition Acts, you know? It'd be like, damn that Jefferson, you know, I'm an Adams guy all the way, you know, and again, it's jets and sharks and, you know, lots of fighting and all that sort of stuff. When in fact, the Alien and Sedition Acts themselves, that particular thing, it's done. We have other things to worry about today, which may or may not be related to the Alien and Sedition Acts or some of the themes of, you know, who says what and everything else, but the fact is those are contemporary things. The contemporary universe of Old Man's War, or any other sort of science fiction universe, has their own logic, has its own internal structure, and to impose the real world into that is in some way to break it. And so, I mean, obviously there are things that are going on in my life, or things I'm thinking about that will filter through. But in that scene in particular, it was more of I needed to write something that was fun, interesting, short, and keeps with kind of the themes that were brought up previously within both the Human Division and the Old Man's War universe in a larger sense. So I've always warned people that trying to figure out my politics from the Old Man's War books is a really bad idea. When the first book came out, Old Man's War, there were a lot of people who thought I was a very conservative man, because military science fiction is typically written by conservative men, and the world that exists in Old Man's War seems to be the sort of place that conservatives would really like. And then they would come to my website and they'd be like, surprise, he's kind of liberal. And that would cause many of them serious. But again, that's why I said don't try to figure out, you know, who I am from the fiction. The fiction is the fiction, and I try to build the worlds as completely as I can. And they don't necessarily reflect how I feel what should be going on in this world. And to some extent, you know, it's great for me when people try to imagine what I was thinking when I was doing all these sorts of stuff, and it's very interesting. And every once in a while, someone goes, "Were you thinking this?" And I'm like, "I guess I was." But in this case, it was just keeping in with what was going in the universe itself, as opposed to what was going outside of the Old Man's War universe. So, any questions from this side? You're really letting us down this side.
Actually, I do. Because you write so much, and it seems like the Old Man War series is slow to develop. Not that you're writing one book right after the other, right after the
Sure.
other. Do you find that writing one part of the series and then writing a standalone kind of reinvigorates you for the rest of the series, keeps those ideas fresh on what you want to talk about within that universe?
Well, I mean, I wrote 4 books in the Old Man's War universe, and the first book was meant to be as a standalone because I was just trying to sell the thing, right? I didn't know anything would ever happen to it. Then the book did very well, and they said, "You have to write a sequel." And I was like, "Oh boy, now I have to fix all the stuff I just kind of like, oh, I don't need to worry about this. There won't be a sequel." Like now there is a sequel. Now I got to figure it out. And then when I wrote the second book, I need to make sure that it was readable without reference to the first book. And then when I wrote The Last Colony, that had its own sorts of things. And then when I wrote Zoe's Tale, it's because Tor came to me and said, "Can you write something that we could possibly sell into the YA market?" Which is why, if you read Zoe's Tale, it has 16-year-old protagonists. It very carefully avoids most bad words and all that other sort of stuff. And they eventually put it in the adult market, which is fine. But it was then you had these 2 books that were kind of taking place in the same period of time. And then I went away from the Old Man's War universe because there was a full narrative arc that was John Perry and his family and their path through the Old Man's War universe. And people kept asking me, "When will you go back? When will you do this?" And I was like, "When I feel it's time, if I feel it's time." Because for me, I mean, the reason I went away with it is I told the story I wanted to tell. And I wasn't going to go back to the universe unless there were more stories to tell that I thought were interesting. One of the great things about the way we were doing this, like I said earlier, was simply that I got to tell it in a way that satisfied my desire to explore that universe more, and that made it appealing to me. But if I hadn't have been able to do that, and if there wasn't, and if there wasn't a story that I wanted to tell in that universe, I would have left it alone. Because, quite frankly, life is short, and I don't want to be one of those authors that just it's the Old Man's War 7, even older. Because then it just becomes the grindy thing where, and people will pick it up and it's fine, and they're like, it's okay, but I really like the first couple of books more, but whatever. I don't want to be the whatever, I'll pick it up because. I want you to pick it up because it is really interesting to you. And in the meantime, I write the standalones because I don't want to just write in that universe. There are other stories I want to tell. I want to have it separate from what's going on there. And also, quite frankly, I don't think it's healthy, to just have one series. Because then it becomes, because authors, I don't know if you know this, we're neurotic. And we're neurotic in any possible way that we can be neurotic. We'll be neurotic about Amazon numbers. We'll be neurotic about bestseller numbers. We'll be neurotic about a review. 10 great reviews, 1 slightly negative review. Oh my God, there was a negative review. And one of the things that I would be personally neurotic about, because I know myself well enough, would be, do people enjoy John Scalzi books, or do they enjoy Old Man's War books? Because, quite frankly, if they just like the series, then that would be bad for me, because anything else I wrote, that would be the author equivalent of when you go to a concert of a band that was really popular like 30 years ago, and then they go, "This is from the new album," and everybody gets up and goes to the bathroom. I want enough in other places that I don't have to worry about that. I will be honest, one of the things that I'm really happy about is that Red Shirts, the novel that came out before this, which is not in the Old Man's War universe, was nominated for a Hugo, which meant that, it wasn't, all my other Hugo nominations so far have been in the Old Man's War universe. It was nice to get a Hugo nomination that was outside of it, because that meant that folks were reading and enjoying, to a significant degree, the books that were not Old Man's War books. So that was very heartening for me. So I write the standalone books because, quite frankly, they're interesting to me. I write the Old Man's War books because, quite frankly, they're interesting to me again. When I'm done telling this particular tale, I'll walk away from the Old Man's War universe again, and we'll see what happens. In the meantime, if one of the standalones becomes something that I can serialize, I might do that. So it all depends. But the main point is, if I'm bored, I guarantee all of you are going to be bored. So I try not to write things that bore me. So.
Anything else?
Yes.
I'm lucky enough I get to listen to audiobooks at work.
Yeah.
Do you get to pick who reads and how much do audiobooks do well? I mean, are they on par with ebooks or anything like that?
Well, in the red shirt, the question is do I get to choose who reads my ebooks or my audiobooks, and how do they do relative to the other thing?
Yeah.
And the I had like that diagram of what my red shirt sales were, and they were something like 40% were or 45% were ebooks, about 35% were hardcover, and the rest were audiobook. So audiobook is a significant portion of my readership, or listenership if you want to call it that. And so it's something that I pay a lot of attention to. Like with anything, when you sell to a publisher, the publisher knows their business, generally speaking. You try to assume, unless otherwise indicated, that they have competence in what they're doing. And so when, in the case of Old Man's War, they originally went with William Dufresne for the guy, I was like, okay, I didn't know anything about it. And of course, William Dufresne has done a very good job, which is why he does this one. But sometimes they ask you your opinion, and then you can give an opinion, and they will follow it or they won't. When I did, when Audible bought the rights to Fuzzy Nation and for Agent to the Stars and for the Android's Dream, they said, well, who do you think, do you have an opinion about who you would want to read? And I was like, yes, I want Will Wheaton to read it. And the reason that I wanted Will Wheaton to read it, aside from he was my friend, toss some money to your friend's way. Here you go, Will, have some money. Is also because Will and I are of the same age. He's a couple years younger than I am, but we grew up in the same area. He has the same sort of cadence that I do. He has the same sort of rhythms that I do. And so when he speaks them, it's as if I speak them only so much better, right? And so he's done an excellent job with it. We've won an audio award together, he and I, for Fuzzy Nation, him because he spoke it and I because I wrote it. So when they ask my opinion, I'm more than happy to give them an opinion. But ultimately, that's their decision to make and not mine. Unless I decide, to self-publish my audiobooks, which is a whole nother, bundle of wax. So we'll see how that goes.
All right. Yes?
Have you ever written a character based on somebody real, and has it backfired?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I have lots of characters that have names of friends and so on and so forth because I'm really bad with names. And there's one character in The Last Colony. His name's Joe Long, 2 O's. And he used to be my, the real Joe Long used to be my editor at America Online. And we were like sassing each other back and forth. And he got the best of me, be like, oh snap, sort of thing. And I was like, that's it, I'm killing you off in my next book. And I have it butchered by aliens. So, And then Zoe's Tales came out, and I tried to avoid having too many scenes that, because they take place in contemporary time with the same cast, I tried to avoid too many scenes that had, common reference between the 2 books. But at one point, that touches in. So I actually had to call him up. I was like, by the way, I just killed you again. You've died twice now. He's like, that's a pattern. I'm like, no, really, I'm not going to do that anymore. But generally speaking, aside from names, no, I don't typically do that. The one exception, quite frankly, is that Jane Sagan, who is a character in the first 3 books of the Old Man's War, 4 books of the Old Man's War series. If anybody has met my wife, Christine, she's very clearly patterned after my wife, Christine. And Chrissy knows it. Everybody who meets Chrissy knows, like, oh, now we get it. And Chrissy is actually very happy about that character. She feels She feels very proprietary towards Jane Sagan. And if they miscast her in the movie, there's going to be death. Death from above. You know, because he will show up at their door and go, "This is your heart." She,
It's also how you predicted I would die.
yeah. By my wife.
By
Yes.
your wife.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
a lot of people will be killed by John's wife.
With the, she's got that
With the
great,
heart grab.
With the heart grab. So, and that's the only one that is sort of explicitly patterned after, because my wife is awesome. You know, and I don't say that subjectively. I mean, objectively speaking, my wife is awesome.
And did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, I came to your work through Metatropolis.
Metatropolis, yes.
So yeah, so after I got that in Iraq, like I went through all of your works after that.
Sure.
Do you have any plans to go back to like a shared universe design at all?
Sure.
Have you thought about that?
For the folks who don't know, Metatropolis was originally actually an audiobook original, and then became a printed book through Tor and through Subterranean Press. They have made 2 sequels to Metatropolis, which I was not involved with simply because I had no time to do it, but both of which are very good. The first one's already out. The second one I think will be coming out soon. Both of those have been edited by Jay Lake, and I think Mary Robinette Cole was his co-editor on the second one, and Ken Scholes will be the co-editor on the third one. I like the idea of the shared universe rather than just it's very recently someone said to me, it's like, oh, you and Neil Gaiman should collaborate. And I was like, well, 2 reasons that's not going to happen. One, you know, let me see in my, you know, I'm going to clear my schedule, and I'm sure that Neil's going to clear his schedule so that we'll have time to write with each other. It's like name the 2 busiest authors in science fiction and fantasy and try to get them to be able to work together. And the other thing is that ultimately one of us would kill the other, and I think that most people would rather that Neil kill me. so that you know, that's not going to work out to my advantage. But the other thing is that I'm just really bad collaborating directly with people. I just don't have that talent. Some people can do it and are very happy with it, and I'm not. But the shared universe thing was actually really cool because we all collaborated on creating the universe. And that wasn't about writing, that was conceptualizing. And then each of the 5 writers that were involved in that project were able to write in their own idiom, in their own style. And we were showing each other all our work at the same time so we could see what the others were doing and pick and choose and take stuff, which is why Edgewater, which I think is the name of the paramilitary corporation, is in all 5 stories. But it was still something where you had the advantages of collaboration with the advantages of writing by yourself. I would totally be down with doing that again. Again, let me look at my schedule and see where I'm going to fit it in. But it was great doing that. I had a wonderful time. It was one of my, I found out a couple things, which is I'm a reasonably good editor. I'm good with, you know, hand-holding, you know, and offering suggestions when that happens. And I wouldn't mind doing some more editing as well, so that would be fun for me.
All right. Any further questions? Yes.
One more.
Last question. Make it good.
All right. Pressure's on. Which book was the most difficult for you to write, whether technically or?
This one. And I will tell you why, which is because we were writing in a way that hasn't really been done a whole lot before, which is, it's not just serially, which is, you know, end each chapter on a cliffhanger, but make each chapter, each episode, its own thing. So it could be read and enjoyed. If you read episode 7 only by itself, you would still get a great story. If you read episode 3 by itself only, you would get a good story. But also make it such that when they're all stacked up, they all make a whole narrative arc there. Oh, and by the way, it needs to be done by October. And so that was a lot of work, and it was a lot of pressure. And, you know, at the end, I was sitting there, no time to eat healthy, just shove food in my mouth and write and panic and all that sort of stuff. And at one point, I had this grand scope that I was going to do, and I realized that I was running out of time, so I actually had to completely retool the thing on the fly and do it in a different way, which actually was great because it's a much better book now than it would have been if I'd done it the original way. So panic works, but it really was doing a lot of things that were kind of untried, untested. We had no idea how people, And when you write a novel, you know that people get the idea of what a novel is, right? When you write an episodic novel told in 13 parts over 13 weeks electronically and then released in a single volume, you have a good chance of people going, what? You're doing what now? I don't understand. So there were, and that was part of it too, because even though we were okay conceptually with the possibility it could fail, when it comes right down to it, I don't want my book to fail. I want people to like my book, and I want it to do well because I have a mortgage and a child going through college, and all those, or who's going to one day go through college, and all these other things. So I wanted it to succeed. So all of this stuff was kind of weighing on me, and literally, like when I finished, I was like, I'm going to sleep. And then it was 4 days later, so it was a lot. But one of the, speaking of Neil Gaiman, he likes to quote a quote, and I can't remember who it's from. It's like, what you learn from your writing a novel is how to write that novel. The next novel will be its own particular sets of challenges. But that said, if we do it in episodic format again, I've done it before. I kind of know where some of the obvious pitfalls are going to be. I will find entirely new pitfalls, and I will be sure to enjoy those. But that said, this was the most difficult one. The easiest one, for contrast, was Red Shirts. I mean, literally just, I wrote that in 5 weeks. Boom, right through that. It's like, I'm getting away with it. You watch this. And that was just a ton of fun. But that's the other reason to do books that are different, because some of them are hard and some of them can be easy, and it's nice to balance them because eventually your brain will implode and it will be unhappy.
Well, that's all we got for questions right now because John has to sign things.
I have to
Sam,
sign.
like
I've actually got one question.
One
Well,
question. Is it
since you are
amazing?
a bookstore employee, we'll let you get away with it.
But it better be amazing.
Better be
It
amazing.
better be, I need a number between 1 and 13.
7.
7. Who has 7 on their ticket, their signing number? You win the Aquaman number 1.
Yay!
Jeff Johns, so. Not by John Scalzi, no.
No.
But he'll
By
sign
Jeff
it.
Johns.
Yeah.
But he'll sign it.
I will totally sign it.
In honor of Comic-Con.
All
so.
right.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I've been Sam Sykes, and this has been John Scalzi with the Human Division.
Thank you. Bye, Internet. Bye, Internet.
So could you get everybody to pick up their chair and just put it against the wall right there, and then we're going to send
I'm going to go use the